The Anglo-American group became dominant and established its standards as paramount. In Chapter 3, The Rise of Anglo-American Society, you will read about the English legacy, Indian-English relations, servants and slaves, the arrival and treatment of the colonial Irish and Germans, as well as the Revolutionary period. The English legacy began in the early 1600s when Jamestown and Plymouth were founded by companies operated under King James I. By that time, English customs, language, ideas of commerce, law, government, and religion were predominant throughout the region. There were three important changes. The king discontinued control. The Virginia Company began to grant settlers land and stock, and the company permitted a representative assembly to be established. As you read in the text, Virginia went tobacco mad. Virginia was an excellent place to grow tobacco, and it provided a big boost to the economy. The new standards were formed, and the European Christians, even though they were taught that all peoples were brothers, they considered some to be inferior to others. Those who came from the outside were regarded as foreigners. You know the saying that if you walk like a duck, smell like a duck, well, then you must be a duck. The more American you look, the more favorable treatment you received. Indians and blacks had been defined as ineligible to participate fully in the developing society. Indians could choose to remain physically within the boundaries of English society. They pretty much stayed away. Blacks had no choice. They were required to remain within those boundaries. Both were socially excluded. What we do know is that the doctrine of white supremacy did not appear to shape the relationships between the whites and these two groups. First, the Indians discovered America. There is evidence that there were people in Alaska by 25,000 BC, and by 15,000 BC, they had reached South America. Second, at least 200 different tribes or bands stretched across the continent. They spoke at least 200 different languages or dialects. They had varying levels of social, economic, and political organization. The initial contacts generally were friendly, and the Indians proved to be essential to the survival of the colonists. As time progressed, friction developed between these two groups. Occupation of the Indians' lands was the biggest issue. Most English did not accept the idea that the Indians were the true owners. Indians were expected to give up the land and move peacefully westward. Laws were put in place, namely the doctrine of vacuum domicilium, which viewed Indian lands as unoccupied. They eventually came to be regarded as unassimilable or ineligible for full membership. Africans in the English colonies did not at first occupy the status of slaves. They were indentured or bonded servants similar to their white counterparts. In less than 50 years, however, that status changed. Virginia and Maryland made changes. They made it more difficult for black slaves to get their freedom. The white indentured or bonded servants could easily disappear among the citizenry where blacks could not. The decline of the African slaves to the status of property increased the size of the slave population and brought more problems. They were perceived as being happy and that they did not resist. Not. When they were first picked up, they fought vigorously. Many killed themselves by jumping overboard. It is said that if the Atlantic was dredged, they would find hundreds of thousands of skeletons of those that jumped. From the beginning, slaves revolted by running away. Fugitive slaves banded together, hooking up and finding sanctuary with Indian societies. The most famous were the Black Seminoles. Of course, whites took preventative measures to keep them ignorant. You will learn more in Chapter 6 regarding the slaves and resistance. For now, the text focuses on the process through which whites came into being the dominant group and the non-whites being in the subordinate position. Let's take a look at the colonial and Scottish Irish. The colonial Irish began to arrive almost at once. On pages 63 to 65, you will read about their arrival and their treatment. Both received mixed reactions from the colonists. Eventually, the main result of the different processes was to help solidify the American majority as the white Protestant group. There was never any widespread doubt that the Scottish Irish could, and given time, would conform to the Anglo-American pattern of life. The colonial Germans were making their way to Pennsylvania about the same time as the Scottish Irish. There were similar complaints about the Germans as there were against the Scottish Irish. It was feared that they may set up a separate German state or even Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs, as Ben Franklin quoted. The assimilation of the Germans into the majority group was slower than that of the Scottish Irish and was accompanied by greater resistance and hostility. The results of the Revolutionary War and later the Constitutional Convention left the Anglo-American majority in firm control of American society. Between 1793 and 1815, there was a decrease in European migration which strengthened this position. By 1790, 4 out of 5 Germans were immigrants from the British Isles or their descendants. And of course, Anglo-American leaders successfully strengthened the power of the post-revolutionary central government. The reality was that America was to be a white man's country. By 1815, the Anglo-conformity ideology was pretty much unchallenged. By definition, non-white people such as blacks and Indians were not and could not become full-fledged Americans. America was to be a white man's country. Those who were dissatisfied with the ideal that they should melt into Anglo-American majority were unable to present a different view that would be accepted by the dominant group. So, I leave you with another question to ponder. How does the imprint of these formative years continue to affect intergroup relations in the United States in today's society?